friends, this is Trish and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have a very special guest named Jane. She has been in education since 2009 and she's taught primarily at the college level. However, she's also taught elementary, middle, and high school in the public and private arena. And in the last few years, she's recently transitioned into instructional design, both at the university level and the corporate level. So she's going to have a ton of insight to share with us. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm curious, what initially got you interested in becoming a teacher?
You know, probably like a lot of people, it just comes from probably liking school when I was a kid and a teen. Not that I loved every bit of school, but generally I did pretty well in school. I kind of enjoyed the classroom setting and that kind of thing. And I think like it goes even farther back, probably the case for other people too. Like when I was a little kid, I liked playing school, with the chalkboard and your eraser and like creating your rosters and stuff. I remember playing school when I was like 8 years old, 9 years old, that kind of thing. And at the time I didn't tell myself I want to be a teacher. That was naturally what I tended to play. And then going into adulthood, it was just something that it just seemed right for me. I had some friends that were educators, and this was before I got my bachelor's degree, so I couldn't be a classroom teacher like they were. But I was so envious of them being educators. It's so weird because I eventually burnt out on teaching. It's weird that at one time I was really envious of people that were in teaching.
I totally understand. So once you actually got in the classroom, what was the most surprising or shocking thing to you initially?
I think that one thing that was a pleasant surprise is that students, although they can be very badly behaved and extremely frustrating, they also can be very supportive. So that was a nice, pleasant surprise. And sometimes they could be both at once, really, really frustrating. And at the same time, like really supportive or tried to be nice at the same time. So, but I can't say that a lot surprised me, either in the classroom or on the administrative side.
Interesting. I've actually never had somebody say that. So I'm really intrigued. So you didn't struggle at all with like classroom management and like engaging students and all the kind of buzzwords they like to throw at teachers?
Well, I mean, I guess I was separating that when you said if I was surprised by anything. Definitely I struggled with things, with classroom management and students having a hard time engaging students and that kind of thing. Because I taught high school, classroom management was different because I have experience teaching at community college and high school mostly. Like my classroom teaching experience is limited to those. I have a little bit of experience teaching middle school and elementary school in the classroom, but they were very, very small class sizes. So I don't have the same experience as other teachers that had like 25 8-year-olds or 25 13-year-olds and that kind of thing. But I think classroom management at the high school level is still tough because the behavioral problems, they're not the same as little kids, but they're still very frustrating. Like the talking back or the just being unengaged or just, whispering and laughing amongst friends while class is going on and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I was surprised. I think one thing that surprised me about kids was being emotionally erratic, one way one day and another way the next day with seemingly no reason for the shift in mood and attitude and that kind of thing.
That makes sense. I remember kind of experiencing the same thing because I kind of taught anywhere between 4th and 8th grade. So sometimes they would be so mature and they'd have this amazing critical thinking. And then it would seem like an hour later they were crying because somebody poked them with a pencil. And I'm like, whoa. So I could definitely relate to that. That's interesting. So I'm kind of curious about the administrative differences between teaching high school and teaching community college. Because every once in a while I'll hear from professors and they'll say, oh, because of watching your videos, I understand why the college kids are crazy and why admins are pressuring us to pass everybody and why we even have parents trying to like get us to change grades in college. So did you experience anything like that?
It's interesting because I taught dual credit. Well, at community college, I teach English classes, basically composition classes. But when I was teaching at the public high school, I was a dual credit English teacher. So that meant I got the students that were taking English, but they were taking they got college composition credit at the same time. And I mean, when you're teaching high school, there's definitely parental involvement, varying degrees, depending on like what your set of parents is like. But we were told that like the dual credit students would be treated a little bit differently, that because it's college level or half college level, or it's like that hybrid, they would try to kind of like treat it more like that than a typical English class where parents don't have as much involvement or get to call you up and ask you about grades. But it was a little bit, I mean, there was still parental involvement there. I didn't mind when I was a dual credit teacher because I understood I was teaching on a high school property, and they were high school students. So it goes with the territory that there's some parental involvement when they're high school students. But what I didn't like, or what I haven't liked, is that dual credit English classes are also taught on college campuses too, where the students are high school students, but they're coming to college campuses to get their credit. Increasingly, there are parents trying to kind of treat it like my kid's still in high school and that kind of thing. I didn't get a lot of it myself, but I have heard from friends that teach dual credit, especially, that they're getting contacted by parents, they're getting emails from parents, and they're college level teachers. And so I'm not sure if like, dual credit is slightly different because it's sort of meant as a high school class and a college class together or at the same time. I'm not sure if instructors that teach just purely what's considered a college class are also getting parents trying to talk to them because their kid's 18 or 19 or that kind of thing.
That makes sense. What was it like in terms of admin? Because I've heard some college teachers complain that because the students essentially need to rate the professor, and submit that to administration, that they almost feel like they're in a customer service position where they've got to make the students happy and bend. Did you kind of get that impression too?
Well, not like I have never heard from administrators at the community colleges that I've taught at that like the student ratings had much bearing on anything. We were encouraged to have students fill out observations, or not observations, but those evaluations at the end of courses. But we were never told, oh, well, you're getting another class, or your position or your pay is going to depend on how your students rate you, that kind of thing. And so I never got that impression. That being said, I do know that some community college instructors don't like, the student evaluations that much, but just because, I mean, I've read an interesting article about this. It was years ago, so I can't really relay all of its points, but it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I don't want to say that like student evaluations don't mean anything, but this article that I had read a while back, and I agreed with, pointed out that a lot of times students of a certain age, like 18, 19, 20, they don't necessarily know what they should be getting. And so they may rate an instructor poorly, not realizing that, that's actually a good thing that instructor is doing that, or it's a good thing that this is that approach and that kind of thing. So I don't think too much should be made of student evaluations, just because not all students have a good understanding of like what their education is supposed to be. And, but some do. So I don't have a strong opinion really about whether student evaluations are wrong or right.
That makes sense. So I know at least when I was a teacher, there was just such a huge push for teachers to practically be like cruise ship performers. It was all about engagement and technology and fun and shiny things. And then I would imagine they probably get to college and there's probably a more traditional lecture style. Did you see students struggle with that, or did they seem to be able to adjust?
Most of the time, because I teach community college, there's such a wide range of ages in the classrooms, like there will be 35-year-olds alongside 40-year-olds, alongside 24-year-olds. The students I had that were clearly just right out of high school, like they were 18 or 19, my experience with them is they tend to be quiet when they're, especially, like it depends on the class though. Like I've had, the more students are all with their same age group and they're 18 and 19, the more it seems like a high school classroom, because I've had a few of those that it wasn't even a dual credit class. It was a standard community college level English class, but it just happened that particular class, it was a daytime class. It was close to where their high school had been. It was like mostly 18 or 19-year-olds and that kind of thing. And they tend to act like that because a lot of them know each other. And because they're all the same age, they act high schooly. I mean, this isn't addressing your question exactly, but I'll get to that in a second. But like more typical for a community college class that I teach, it's just a wide range of ages. And as such, the young students, the ones that are clearly just out of high school, they tend to be quiet. It's probably because they know they're not with their peer group and that kind of thing. So I didn't necessarily get a sense of them feeling like, why isn't this like my high school class was, you know? Instead, they tend to be quiet. And I do think that some of them still feel like uncomfortable because they were used to being babied a little bit more. You know, they were used to having their teacher follow up behind them and say, well, where's this assignment? You haven't turned that in. You know, there's 3 assignments missing here. And just really just kind of being, I don't know, just like constant presence of monitoring progress and behavior and attendance and that kind of thing. And they don't come out and say that to me or anything like that, but that's just something I assume is the case, just because in meetings amongst, you know, in English department meetings, we're often told that we should try to follow up with those students a little bit more because they're used to that. And a lot of them, if you don't follow up with them, if you don't like ask them, where's this, where's that, why didn't you turn this in? You know, you have 5 absences right now. They kind of can just drop off because they feel like nobody's looking after them, basically.
Well, honestly, it sounds like you kind of had a nice teaching experience. What ended up leading you to kind of feel burnt out or kind of feel like, you know what, I think I'm done with classroom teaching?
Okay, I definitely can like speak to that, which is one thing, like, especially in the year just before I officially got out, some things that were bugging me. One was lack of student motivation. I was teaching at a private school in my city, and it just seemed like the vast majority of my students were complaining a lot, rolling their eyes, sighing, just being very kind of negative body language about so many assignments. And I don't even believe I was giving difficult or really complicated or time-consuming assignments. They were pretty standard for high school. I was teaching 11th grade. And that frustrated me even more, as like these assignments are reasonable. And I'm getting such negative body language about everything, you know? And I definitely think that for some students, I don't think that my workload was so heavy. I think it was a lot that many students overload themselves with sports and activities and clubs and that kind of thing. And because you would hear that a lot, like, I have baseball practice tonight, I can't do this, or I'm supposed to run this thing over the weekend, just all their extracurricular activities, which is one of the things that I think is a little bit of a problem in education. I'm for extracurricular activities. I'm for, you know, the well-rounded experience of being a teenager and that kind of thing, where you can't just do school. But it just seems like a lot of students prioritize that over doing their schoolwork. So that was one thing. That was one thing that really was like, I'm done. I felt like I just can't do this. You know, like, I know that part of the job of a teacher is to be a motivator, but I just don't know if I want to spend my work life listening to people gripe about having to write a page, and they're in 11th grade. You know, they're in 11th grade, and like, they're hard pressed to type 2 pages of their thoughts about something. And it's like, that's not too much to ask of an 11th grader, you know? So it was that. I think, the volume of work. I mean, this is pretty standard for teachers to feel like, I'm just tired of leaving work and still working in the evenings and the weekends and that kind of thing. You know, I have to put a lot into the actual teaching in class, and I work during my planning period. It just started to wear on me that I'm doing so much on the weekends too. It's not just the grading, it's the document, it's getting into the systems, documenting these grades, filling out these parent progress reports, all kinds of things that just like add to your workload over the weekend and the evenings. It was that I actually ceased my full-time classroom teaching during the pandemic, during that first fall of the pandemic. It was like we all went into lockdown March 2020. And it was around August of that year that I told myself, I am going to start seeking other positions, other lines of work. And I didn't get anything until about 4 months later. So it was at the end of the year, but I started looking in August of 2020. So I was a little resentful of that too. I was resentful of the force back into the classroom. I myself wasn't terrified of getting COVID. I mean, like, I was averagely worried, but I wasn't I'm not immunocompromised. I wasn't in the elderly population. I wasn't especially vulnerable, but I was still concerned like all adults were. And I didn't like how the administration was just saying, well, it doesn't matter what you want. You need to come back into this classroom, and I increasingly resented how not just my school, but schools in general seem to prioritize what the parents want and what the students want, and really had little care for what the teachers wanted or were concerned about and that kind of thing. So even though I wasn't worried about COVID myself in terms of health, not so much anyway, it was just on principle. I felt like I'm done with this, So those are 3 things that were just wearing on me, basically. And I didn't mention student behavior. I talked about the motivation thing, but I had some pretty badly behaved students that fall too.
Oh, do tell.
Well, I had one kid. I'll mention 2 because these 2. One kid was just sort of like taunting me all that fall. Not necessarily every day, but I think I could count on at least once a week him being sort of nasty toward me for no apparent reason, not like he wasn't being like nasty to my face or anything like that, but he would be in the classroom snickering to other students about me, or just saying something about me and they would giggle and that kind of thing, and this was a student I'd had 2 years in a row, because it was a pretty small private school where the setup, never mind the details, but the setup was like, I had some students while they were 11th graders and 12th graders. So, or in their 11th grade year and then again in their 12th grade year. So it was a student I'd had when he was in 11th grade and he was much nicer that year. And then the next year he just got like where he was more mocking and just more kind of nasty in his attitude toward me. I don't know if other teachers were getting it too, because I didn't speak to them, but that student. And then I had another student in another class that he was actually never disrespectful to me directly, but I really took exception to him. He did something that I thought was just really awful. Basically that fall we had a visiting teacher, a visiting art teacher. I'm not using the right term, but it was a slam poet, basically. We were doing slam poetry through one of the organizations in my city that does all kinds of art and theater with students. Their thing was slam poetry, and they go to different schools and kind of have a teaching artist work with the students to write poems and to perform the poems in slam poetry format. We were doing it over Zoom. The teaching artist was with us over Zoom. And so it was the teaching artist and then all the kids in Zoom. It was about smallish private school. So the class sizes were only like 12 tops. Okay. So, well, this teaching artist was a Black man, and a lot of his poems were about race, and one in particular he performed for us in the Zoom was on James Byrd, I think Jr. I'm not sure if it's James Byrd or James Byrd Jr., but that's a well-known case of racial violence that occurred in 1998. It was in Jasper, Texas, but the teaching artist was a Black man, and he performed a poem about that incident, which is well known. I mean, it's very, very well known. And it was clearly very emotional for him, and just it meant something to him as a Black man performing a poem about racial violence and that kind of thing. Well, one of my students, just right after the teaching artist performed that poem, put a Confederate flag up on his profile picture in the Zoom.
Wow.
I was just so appalled. I was absolutely appalled. After it was over, I spoke to another teacher. I spoke to the principal. I said, this is what this student did. You need to do something about this, and they kind of and I was just so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed, and I apologized to the teaching artist. And I tried to get the student dealt with. I wanted some kind of consequence for him doing that. And they did take some sort of steps toward it. And then, a couple other students in the class, so, they also spoke up about it. They also spoke up about that this kid did that, right? And the administration, they did a few things. They took him out of class. They called his parents. They put him in they don't call it timeout, but that's essentially what it was. They put him in a room, and he had to sit by himself and whatever. But I kind of wanted more serious consequences for him. I didn't want to see him in my classroom anymore. You know, I was hoping he would get kicked out of the school, frankly. I didn't care. I just didn't like him doing that. And but he was back in my class like 2 days later, and I kept following up and asking, like, what's going to be done? Like, aside from him having to sit in the room for a little while, what's been done? And they told me that they'd called his parents, and his mother got on the phone or whatever and said, I swear to you that he is not like that. She pretty much did the whole, you know, my child is not that kind of person. You're misunderstanding the situation. And I didn't really buy it. Neither did another teacher I told about it. We were both like, no, he did that on purpose, you know? And so I was, you know, it wasn't just that, but, you know, since we're mentioning the things that were like making me angry that semester, on top of everything else, you know, the no motivation to do any work, the workload, the resentment over being forced back into the classroom, and then, you know, that kind of behavior. I even wrote an email afterwards. I wrote an email to the principal, and I said, I really don't appreciate that nothing was done about this boy. You know, I said, I was kind of like pushing, you know, I was kind of at that point. I think because I was job searching on the sly, I felt like, well, let me just kind of make some waves anyway, you know? And I kind of said, I really resent that nothing is being done about this and you're not taking it seriously. And I said, you know, I believe this was a long time ago. I mean, at this point, this was 2020. So it's 2.5 years ago. I believe I said something about me being like a woman of color, that this matters to me. And I don't appreciate that you're not doing anything about this behavior of this boy. And just like, and you know, in my mind, I thought, of course they don't care. They want the tuition money from the parent, you know? They want the tuition money from the parent. They don't care they don't care how the kids behave as long as they get the tuition money. You know, that was my thinking.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's kind of difficult sometimes to explain some of the funkiness in the air at private schools, but I definitely experienced a lot of similar things like that. And it's really easy for people to say like, oh, you misunderstood, or like, surely they didn't mean that. But it's like, well, you know, I guess I'm not welcome here if nobody can see the problem with these things. So you were brave to stand up in that situation. And
wow. The mother actually emailed me. She emailed me all kinds of like excuses, and I didn't see, like, this all happened in the last month I worked there, because I know this. I mean, like I said, I was job searching. I was interviewing at other places. This was like in December of 2020. And I had already been on many Zoom interviews for other positions outside of the classroom. And so on some level, I felt like I'm probably getting close to getting a position. And I didn't worry that too much. I didn't reply to the mother. She emailed me saying a bunch of stuff, excusing him, and just, I didn't reply to her because I knew that I was going to be leaving soon and I didn't have to make peace with any parent, basically.
Yeah. So did you have other experiences that frustrated you with parents at the private school level, or is this just kind of like a one-off thing that happened?
No. Interestingly, like my overall experience with parents hasn't been bad in a just one-on-one behavior sense. Like, generally speaking, even because I've taught at a public school that was lowish socioeconomic, and all minorities, and then at this private school that was all white kids and wealthy. And in both realms, I didn't have a lot of problems with parents, which is something that I was, but I will say something just a moment here, because when I first got into high school, that was one reason I was always reluctant to go into high school teaching, because most of my teaching experience has been at community college, and that was where I started mostly. And one of my big reasons for being reluctant to go into high school teaching was, I don't want to deal with parents. I don't want to deal with parents. But, you know, I got to the point where it's pretty tough to get full-time community college positions. It was much easier to get full-time high school positions. So at a certain point, I needed a full-time position enough to go there, basically. But I was pleased that overall I didn't have as many parent nightmare situations as I told myself that I might, and that like kind of culture tells us that we will. And I have no doubt that other teachers do. It's just I was fortunate not to have too many bullying parents. That being said, I have had parents, I don't know what the word is. Just because they don't outwardly bully you doesn't mean they're not advocating for their kid in situations that they shouldn't be. You know what I mean? So like one example I'll give is that when I worked at the high school, both places were high schools, the public high school, I gave a student an N, and you know how they get conduct grades? Well, it was S for satisfactory and N for needs improvement, that kind of thing, right? There's probably some other denotations or indications, but I gave this one young man an N in my class for behavior, not his grade, just behavior, because he was sleeping in class constantly, just laying his head down and sleeping, you know? And I didn't take it personally because he was a nice boy. And I was told, I think even from him or someone, maybe his parent later, but he was one of these students I'm talking about that's like in athletics. He was a baseball player, and he spent so much time at practice that he was sleep deprived. So I didn't take it personally, but even though I knew the reason, I'd still like, well, I understand the reason, but that doesn't change the reality that he's sleeping in class every single day. So I gave him an N, you know. There wasn't a place for me to explain why, you know, but I had no problem explaining why. But anyway, his mother called the school up and said all this stuff and said, my child has never gotten an N in conduct and that kind of thing. And so I actually had meetings with her and the administrators over her son's N, you know, and this is what I'm saying. She wasn't mean to me. She wasn't, you know, saying, oh, that horrible teacher. She wasn't outwardly mean-spirited or saying that I should be fired or anything like that. But she was just strong-arming the situation that her son needs to get an S. And it had to do with the reason why he had to have an S is that the rule at the school is that they can't be in their sports program without meeting, you know, all A's and B's or just one C, and all their conduct grades have to be an S. So you see how, you know, this is like a conflict, because it's like, well, if he gets an N, this is going to jeopardize baseball, you know? And I can't remember, you know, I actually had meetings with the administrators about this, and they and the mother were strong arming me to give him an S instead. And I just said, you know, you can do what you want. You can, like, I don't control what you do on his report card or the records. You can do what you want. I don't agree with him getting an S. You know, and I shouldn't have to like give him an S when that's not the true assessment of his behavior in my class. And they said, no, we don't want to just do what we want. We want you to agree that he should get an S. So it's really odd. I mean, I found this odd that it's almost like even when they're told, when a teacher says, you know what, I don't agree, but you can do what you want. They still want to kind of manipulate the situation to where, oh, they're not just changing grades, or they're not just changing conduct grades arbitrarily. They want to force you to agree with them, which is kind of crazy, you know? I can't remember. It's been a while. I can't remember how it got resolved, but I do know that was probably, like, those administrators didn't like me because I wouldn't just say, I agree, or, yeah, I understand, or, you know, I was a bit defiant that year, where I was like, this is ridiculous. You know, it's like, it's not personal. And that's what I kept telling them. I said, it's not personal. Me giving him an N is not personal. You know, I actually even like the boy. He was a sweet kid, but that's not how I decide behavior. You know, if he is sleeping in class every day, that's really not good student behavior. So, I forgot how it got resolved, but I do know that they didn't like my unwillingness to submit to just, you know, agreeing with everything. And okay, so that was one thing. That's what I'm saying about the parents and them just being very like, they're not necessarily mean to teachers, although they probably are to some. I just haven't had a lot of that, but they're still, and then at the private school, many of the parents just wanted you to change the students' grades. You know, they wanted you to, like, if toward the end of the grading period, a student was getting a D or failing, the parent would be all on their email, all on the phone with you. They wouldn't necessarily say change his grade, you know. They wouldn't be that direct, like that they're you know, just kind of buying, not necessarily buying, I'm not using the right term, but just, you know, the kid's not getting grades on merit. They're basically just having their parents call up and save them at the end of the grading period by saying, how can we get these grades up? And I don't know, in my opinion, very few, any student that has that many missing assignments and that many like 25s and 30s on quiz grade at the end of a grading period isn't going to suddenly do all the work in the last 3 days. You know, like the kind of students that would do all the work in the last 3 days, like truly and with quality, wouldn't be in that position in the first place. You know, you see what I'm saying, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So even though like there was this idea that, well, I know he hasn't done any of the work all these 5 weeks, but what can we make him do it in the last 3 days? They're not going to do it, because if they were the type of person that would do it, it would have been done all along. So essentially, even though we're using this idea that, okay, but they're going to do it in the last 3 days, really it's a way of just saying, let him or her, you know, scribble something, hand it to you, and you change these grades to B's or something like that. So that's the kind of parent situations I got. I mean, I'm sure you can relate to this, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, I was kind of in a lot of urban school districts where they had like standards-based grading anyway. So really, it didn't matter if they were missing 75% of their assignments. There was nothing we could do. It didn't go in a grade book. And so I feel like our situation was the worst of both worlds, really, because not only were the kids not doing the work, but it wasn't even a situation where they had to pretend to, because the way that they were assessed was just on, you know, these periodic district benchmark tests. And so nothing that they did or didn't do in class even counted. It was a complete nightmare. And, you know, the private school was kind of similar, but I got so beaten down by that situation, you know, kind of toward the end, I was like, I don't even care, like, sure, you know. But
well, yeah. I mean, okay, some of the stuff, like some things you're asking me probably later, I'm going to be like, why didn't I say this? Why didn't I say that? One thing you asked me this at the beginning about, and something you said just reminded me of what I was surprised by. And you know, I wasn't surprised, but at the same time, I was surprised. There's a lot of grade inflation happening in schools. I mean, I'm sure that you've covered this on your channel a lot, but that wasn't that it surprised me. It's just that I started to see it firsthand. You know what I mean? A lot of grade inflation, and like I definitely, like in my first year at that public high school, I had flunked like 22 students. I had flunked because they deserved it. They weren't doing any of the work, or they were doing it very, very badly. I flunked 22 students, and like an administrator came to me, and again, I think they were trying to save face a little bit, where they don't want to come out and say, the bottom line is you can't do this. We have to change these grades. They don't want to say that. They will put it some other way, like, what can we do about this? You know, what can be done? You know, and it's like, well, what needs to be done? They failed, you know? But I've definitely had some of the administrators come to my door, knock on it with some forms, having me change grades from a D to a B and just sign this.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I know.
So did that happen a lot, or did you, after the first time that happened, did you just kind of stop giving people failing grades once you realized what was going to happen?
Well, see, I didn't do it like that was that first year that I taught at the public high school. I was a dual credit teacher. I didn't flunk 22 students just to be like, oh, let's rile everybody up. Let me piss everybody off. You know, I wasn't trying to do that. I was just trying to grade the truth, basically, right? Like I was grading what reflected reality of the performance and what was turned in. So I was surprised. Well, I wasn't I had a colleague that was also teaching dual credit English, and you know, I was pretty friendly with the dual credit history teacher too, and we kind of like talked about, oh, how many of your kids failed, how many of yours, and they did have fewer students fail than me. That said, the history teacher had been there longer than me. Maybe he already knew that that's a big no-no, you know, but I did have a high number of failures compared to the two other dual credit teachers that I kind of associated with, you know, but I still didn't necessarily think, oh, well, I'm going to change this to get to where I'm like at the same numbers as they are. I just let it be, you know, and when an administrator spoke to me, I just said, I don't remember what I said, honestly, because this was years ago, but I do remember just being like, well, what's the problem? You know, like I didn't necessarily, because it was just one grading period. It wasn't the final grade, you know, it was like maybe the first grading period. I didn't know what the big deal was, but I soon caught on that they didn't like 20. No, actually, I take that back. It wasn't just, it was the first semester. You know, it was the semester, so it was the half point of the year, right? So those failures that I had would determine if some of the students continued and those students continued in DC. That's what they called it then, dual credit. So the way we worked it out was I agreed to put the students on probation, academic probation, instead of them failing. So I don't know if we changed grades. Maybe we didn't. I don't remember. But I do know that I agreed to kind of create this letter to the parents and the students saying, you are on probation. And, you know, they were able to return to dual credit the next semester, but they needed to have no more, you know, everything needed to be on time. There were just certain like guidelines, but that's, you know, the way they had me do it instead of failing. Because at these high schools, part of their funding and part of like, you know, the money they get from the state or whatever, I don't know because I'm not an administrator, but I caught on that like at the administrative level, their numbers matter to them, right? Like number of students in AP, number of students in dual credit, you know, so they like to keep their numbers of students in these like programs high because it makes it look like the school's doing well and we're meeting our, you know, benchmarks or whatever. And so they don't want the dual credit numbers decreasing. So, you know, that's how that works.
It's even more surprising that, you know, there was that many failures in a dual credit program because at least, you know, the picture is that these are the best and the brightest and the most hardworking kids. So that's kind of crazy that they were even, you know, like not turning in work and doing that badly.
Well, let me make clear, like when I say 22 students, I mean not in a single class. Because see, like I was one of 2 dual credit English teachers. My colleague had 5 classes. I had 5 classes. I mean, 22 students out of like 150 students, you know.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Because if it was 22 students out of a class of 25, that would be most of the class. It was 150 students. 22 failed.
At a grade level.
Yeah.
That is interesting. I mean, it doesn't surprise me because I know how kids are these days, but at the same time, like I, you know, have never taught like gifted or kind of like, you know, like higher level or dual credit or anything like that. Because I went to like a magnet high school where we were basically like, we had to take all AP dual credit and like, it was so competitive. And so that's just like a little bit like interesting to me.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing is that I also think that not some high schools, I mean, I can only speak to the one I was teaching for. I think they were putting students in the dual credit program that didn't belong in it. You know, because dual credit and AP or whatever, those are supposed to be for students that have proven they're advanced and that kind of thing, right? I think anyway, if you're not advanced, there's no shame, in my opinion, there's no shame in not being advanced, you know? If you're like on level, what's so wrong with that, you know? In my opinion, maybe parents see it differently. I mean, I
agree.
There is status to being in honors and in dual credit. So I get it. But at the same time, I think if you put too many students in those things that don't belong there just because they want to feel high level or you want your school to seem high level, but they don't do well in them, and then you force the teachers to lower the standards to make it look like they do well, it's not a good thing. And I also think that like if you give students grades that aren't really reflective of how they're doing, they also don't get a sense of their abilities. You know, they're getting a sense, and this is where I think this is something I would say like is a trickle thing into community college, is that many students in community college, and I don't, you know, this may sound like, oh, I'm a harsh grader or something. I'm not. I try to be really reasonable and err on the side of easy grading, if anything. But, you know, definitely community college teachers experience students maybe getting a C on a paper or a D on a paper, and the student coming to us and saying, I got all A's in my high school. Any paper I wrote in high school was an A or a B. I mean, I definitely got that in my early years of teaching community college. And I don't remember if I said it to the student or not. Maybe I did, but I know definitely said it to teacher friends that some of these students are saying that they got all A's on every essay they wrote in high school. And I was like, that's because your teachers are just giving you A's, no matter how crappy your work is, you know, no matter how low quality, no matter how bad, they're just giving you an A anyway, you know, and at some point you might get hit with someone really grading you and telling you the truth, you know? So that's my point, is that like, if students aren't, I mean, many adults and many teachers are aware of grade inflation. You know, we know that students are getting higher grades than they really deserve. And maybe some students are aware of it too, but others, they don't have a sense of their ability. if they just get a bunch of A's and B's, they don't know that their work is bad. They think they're doing just fine, you know? So it's a problem because they carry that into college and think, oh, that their community college teacher or their university teacher is hates them or something, you know?
Yeah, I was definitely wondering about that, because just that has always been my number one thought with all the weird moves in education. I'm just thinking, you know, unless the colleges have to completely change to become just like high school, I'm like, this is going to be like a disaster for generations to come. So that makes a lot of sense for sure.
Yeah.
So going back to the year you finally decided to step out of the classroom, did you end up quitting in the middle of the year, or did you finish out the year? How did that all go?
I did. I quit in the middle of the year, and I was that fed up, you know. Now, I was teaching at a private high school the pandemic year. Well, I know we've been in a few years of the pandemic, but I'm talking about that first year. I was teaching at a private school, and because I started job searching in August, which was the very beginning of the school year, I knew that it was a big possibility that I got a position before the school year ended, but I told myself I'm that miserable, you know. And I checked my contract because, you know, I had signed a teaching contract, but I realized, and this is different for public schools. I mean, it's like the private school that I was teaching for, they did have you sign a contract, but it's almost a formality. It's because the employment contract was at will. So despite the fact that it was, quote, a contract, it really, I think, like I talked to somebody about, like, why do they have you sign a contract if it's not really a contract? You really can quit anytime, and there's no, and I think we agreed that it probably is just something that like makes it feel a little bit more like a commitment, whatever, you know. But I was an at-will employee. There was no, you know, legal concern for me. And I did quit mid-year. But I did make a point, like, so here's the thing. I actually didn't get a job. Like, it was like maybe December 3rd or so that I gave my notice. I said, I'm resigning. I'm not going to come back after Christmas to teach in January, February, March. And I hadn't gotten a job yet. I hadn't gotten another job. But I had a lot of interviews. Like, I'd had many interviews to move into an instructional design position. And I told myself, I feel pretty confident that something is going to come up. And I'd rather quit now, because it's not good to quit mid-year, but if you're going to quit during a school year, mid-year is at least the time that the school can, you know, everything's tied up, loose ends are tied up for that semester. January tends to feel like another start, you know? So I said, let me go ahead and quit now. I can feel pretty comfortable that something's going to come along. And I think I had about enough, you know, money saved that I would be okay for 2 months without anything. So I quit mid-year. My direct supervisor, you know, she was like sad. She was like, you know, I don't want you to go. And like, what can we do to make it better? All that. And I was like, nothing really, you know. I don't really even know that she so much wanted to keep me as she just didn't want to have to find a replacement, you know, mid-year. That's pretty difficult and that kind of thing. But I quit mid-year, and the people that I dealt with, which was my direct supervisor, the head of the English department at school I was teaching for, and like, you know, a couple of the high level administrators that I dealt with most, they didn't, at least outwardly, get mad at me or anything. They were like, we understand, you know. They actually didn't ask that many questions. They didn't ask that many questions about, like, my direct supervisor did, but the high level administrators, they just, you know, said, we get it. Okay. You know, and they were pleasant, but they didn't ask questions. And I think I assumed that everything was fine, like in terms of, like, you know, I wasn't leaving on bad terms or anything like that. But I will say this, and this doesn't necessarily mean anything for sure, but later on, I contacted my direct supervisor and those two administrators asking if I could count on them for employment reference, because I was seeking another position. And I believed that I left on good terms. I gave more than 2 weeks. I gave my notice, so to speak, on December the 3rd. And the last day of that December teaching was like December the 20th, right? So that was a good, you know, and everything was pleasant, you know, but all of them pretty much did not contact me when I contacted them, asking them about if I could list them as employment references. And two of them responded me because I initially just said, you know, I'm reaching out. Do you remember me? I was teaching there. And they were like, yeah, Jane, how are you doing? And then as soon as I asked them about the employment reference thing, they no longer responded to me.
Wow.
So I feel like I must have been on bad terms with them for leaving mid-year, you know.
Did you struggle with any guilty feelings about the students, or were you like, good riddance?
No, I didn't. I didn't struggle with any guilty feelings. I mean, I just wasn't. I didn't feel guilty about it. Maybe that's selfish of me, you know. I didn't feel guilty about it. I was more frustrated with the situation. So I was pretty happy to leave.
Well, good for you. So kind of transitioning into the work you do now, what exactly does an instructional designer do?
I would say that it's at the university where I was an instructional designer, it was by and large helping the professors put together their online classes in Blackboard, Canvas, that kind of thing, and being sort of like tech support for those platforms if they had issues with the grade book or creating tests and quizzes and that kind of thing. Instructional design in higher ed it's just very similar to K through 12 and college in general. Similar to it it's just basically dealing with those classes, basically. Only you're behind the scenes helping professors put together classes rather than in the classroom teaching yourself or the online instructor yourself. In corporate spaces, instructional design is more along the line, corporate or like any kind of nonprofit organization. It's more along the lines of helping to create the professional development that employees have to do. In any position, people have ongoing training or ongoing learning related to their position. But much of the learning in corporate spaces is actual like content of the work too. So an instructional designer is a person that kind of helps to create it, to help to optimize it, put it on platforms for the employees and that kind of thing.
Okay, so is it like you're coming up both with the content and how to display it? Oh, wow, that's interesting. Do you like it?
It's like, I do like it. It's like, you know, I probably didn't describe it that well, but, you know, one of the things that I work on a lot in my current position is creating scenario-based learning. So I basically like write situations of workers and employees and kind of the conflicts and situations they have and like how they should handle this type of situation. In a lot of cases, it's actual like learning content. I'm actually trying, you know, not to be too specific because I don't want to, you know, state my employee or employer here, but it will be the actual content of the work that people are doing. So I have to kind of like help put together the learning and write some of the content, find video enhancements, images, audio, all that kind of thing.
Oh, that's really interesting. So I'm kind of wondering, like, can any teacher transition into that space, or do you need like additional courses and certifications?
You can definitely, like at the university where I was doing instructional design. I was going to say like 2 of my colleagues had not taught like me or not as much as me. Like I have a lot of teaching experience dating back to 2008. 2 of them that were instructional designers, they didn't have nearly as much. Like one had a little bit of classroom teaching experience, but very little compared to me. And the other had no classroom. Well, I think he had been a band director at a high school at some point or a middle school or something. But so, I mean, that's teaching experience, but they didn't have as much as I had, but they both had master's degrees in education. And I also pursued a master's degree in education. I think like definitely instructional design is many classroom teachers transition to instructional design, and people hiring instructional designers definitely look for former educators, classroom teachers, online instructors, and that kind of thing. You don't have to do any additional schooling. It would probably help just because a lot of people that are seeking those positions have them. Like they either have a certificate or they have a master's degree or some kind of degree in instructional design. That was my whole reason, because I got my position at a university without the degree, but I had it on my resume because I enrolled in a program. And I'm at this point, I'm finished with it. But I basically was hired based on my teaching experience.
Nice.
But I added the degree to make it, to kind of give myself a leg up. But if you are a classroom teacher wanting to move into instructional design, I believe people can get those positions if they present themselves in a way that is appealing to those hiring. And that has to do with your resume, your cover letter, creating a little portfolio and that kind of thing. And just wording your experience. I mean, this is like with any job. It's not specific to instructional design. If you want to move into a particular role, you really have to kind of market yourself in the language you use on your resume and your materials that kind of presents you as capable of doing that work.
That makes sense. Well, I actually really hadn't heard anything about it before. So I'm glad to have you as a guest, because I think that's going to give teachers hope, because I know teachers just constantly asking, like, what can I do? Because it's so weird. Teachers have so many amazing skills, but it seems like a lot of professions don't necessarily consider teachers. So I'm really glad that I could recommend another thing for them.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely recommend it. And I'm glad I discovered it too, because remember I said, like, in August of 2020 is when I told myself I'm looking for other jobs. I'm not going to continue classroom teaching. I was initially just applying for like writer jobs, like copywriting or any kind of content writing and that kind of thing, because my background is in English and I enjoy writing. But somewhere in my search, just, when you're job searching, you tend to be looking around, you're on job sites, you're on LinkedIn. Somehow I just discovered this role, instructional designer. And I thought, that's really appropriate for me. Like I have the skill set for that. And it's in line with what I've already been doing. It's a different context, but it's still kind of in the same realm. And as soon as I discovered it, I hopped on it. And a lot of teachers are transitioning to instructional design. So it's become increasingly the move for classroom teachers.
Nice. So kind of comparing the job that you have now and the jobs that you've had in the instructional design space, would you say that you're happier and more fulfilled now? Or do you ever kind of miss teaching and kind of miss the kids? How does that work?
So that's a good question, because I do miss it a little bit. And so I transitioned to instructional design in late 2020 or early 2021. But I have been an adjunct. Like my community college teaching has never been full-time. I've always been an adjunct, which means I just teach as many classes as, that are offered to me and that I take. So I actually kept teaching. Like I was teaching one class a semester, all of 2021 and 2022. This semester, this 2023 spring, I have not been. But so I have still had students part-time while instructional designer, because I taught a couple online classes and then I taught an in-person one in the fall of 2022. And so I didn't have to miss students completely because they were still in my life. But now I don't have any students at all. I do miss them sometimes, because even though I think I'm on the what I consider the colder end of the spectrum with students. I'm just being real. There are teachers that are more like warm and like, that kind of thing. I'm probably on the colder end, to be honest. But I'm not completely, I still am endeared to my students, and that's true. I was endeared to many of the high school students. I was endeared to my college students. And because I've got close to many of them over the years, and just, oftentimes you can't help it. Like if you're a teacher, no matter which end of that spectrum you're on, even if like I'm calling it the colder end of the spectrum, you get endeared to your students. And I always want the best for them. Especially most of my teaching has been lower socioeconomic students. I mentioned that private school. That private school that I was teaching at was just for a year and a half. At the community college, most of my students are first generation college students. They're minorities. They have difficult lives. Everything is hard for them. Health problems, transportation problems, kids. So I'm endeared to them, and my heart goes out to when they have struggles and that kind of thing. So I miss them. It's just very hard because I have spent so many years, like since 2008, overworked as a teacher, too much grading, too much prepping. And as an adjunct, because I was an adjunct at community college and teaching at several community colleges, which means driving all around the city to this community college, to that community college. I've just been so tired for over a decade. Even if I do miss the students, I need a break from grading and from all the work that teaching entails. Teaching is to me, because I've, now that I have been in some office jobs now and in instructional design, teaching is more work than any other job I've ever had. It's so much work. So I miss the students, but I'm just I need work-life balance right now.
Cool. Well, I'm wondering what you would give as advice to like a teacher that is in any number of the situations that you've been in, whether it's with kind of pushy admin, being sneaky, or kind of annoying students, or kind of, interesting parents. Like, what would you encourage them with in terms of whether they should stay or whether they should just jump out of the nest and try something different?
Well, okay. So since like my whole story was sort of just like leave, because that's what I did, I was like, okay, I don't want to do this. I'm leaving. So, I mean, the obvious thing, if you're very unhappy as a teacher, is to maybe pursue a different position. But if teachers are not going to leave, and maybe they struggle as a teacher, but they still like it more than not, it still feels like the right thing for them more than it doesn't. I think one of the things that I have done over the years that made teaching less stressful for me is to sort of pick your battles about things. Yeah. And because you really can't control like how schools are or how students are or how parents are, but you can choose to be a little more chill about everything, like with the situations I described where I had those intense meetings with administrators about giving that kid an N in conduct, or other things too. Even like in my early years of teaching, I was like much more strict. I was much more strict about everything, harder on the students and that kind of thing. And I think in order to reduce the stress for myself, I just became more relaxed about everything, just to give an example, since I probably sound kind of vague. In the early days of my teaching, the early years of my teaching, I was very strict about deadlines with my students, and documenting absences and that kind of thing. And as I just became a little bit more relaxed about those things, still kind of caring, but like just not, working myself up into like, a popping vein situation. It just became better because at the end of the day, I think, the human connection part of school is very important. And, it's just not worth it to get worked up over too much administrative stuff. Basically.
I totally agree. That's kind of what I ended up having to do as well, because in my earlier years of teaching, I would just like hunt kids down over homework, and I had like spreadsheets and sticker charts, and I'd be like reprinting things out and just driving myself nuts, and other teachers are looking at me like, why? And I'm like, That's the principle of the matter. But then I just stopped. I'm like, you know what? If you don't want to do homework, the school's not going to back me up on making you do homework. Your parents going to make excuses for you not doing homework. Why am I killing myself over this homework? So I totally agree with you.
I mean, like half of it, I know it's a little bit like resigning yourself, but it really, like, it might seem like it's, giving up. I don't see it like that. I think it's for your own well-being too, to just calm down, and like, even like that last semester, I told you with that student, not the one that did the Confederate flag thing, but the one that was like taunting me. It was mean-spirited and mocking me, to the other students. And it, initially it got, because those things, like teachers have feelings too, like we feel embarrassed, we feel hurt, when the students are laughing and it seems to be at you, or they're rolling their eyes at you and other students are agreeing with, this is too much work. And, when you feel like your students hate you, it hurts and it feels bad, So when that student was taunting me, initially I felt like, this hurts, like you're being mean to me, But eventually I just got to this place where I was just like, I just tuned it out. And there's this term that is used called gray rock. They use it like when people talk about dealing with toxic people, you have to just kind of go gray rock with them, where you're just, you just become a zombie with no feelings or thoughts. I had to kind of like put myself in gray rock mode to just tune that student out that was being mean-spirited toward me. But so I'm saying that applies to other things too. Like where I would, in my earlier years, I would be really angry that nobody did the reading. Nobody did the reading. And, you know, it's not right because we needed to talk about this thing, you know, and everything that it used to upset me, I just purposefully became more chill about for my own well-being, you know? So I think that like if you're in teaching and you're going to stay, and I'm not recommending don't care or just kind of tune out your responsibilities, but just if you can, I'm not offering a method, but to kind of purposefully relax about things more.
I totally agree. I kind of heard a quote somewhere and it said like, if you're in a bad situation, you have two options, either change the situation or you have to change. And I think as human nature, we want so badly, at least me, to like change everything around me and change people and change their mindsets. And I was eventually realized like, well, that's not working out for me. So eventually I could, you know, leave and change my actual situation. But while I was stuck in it, I was like, I have to kind of adjust expectations and go with the flow. And I think it's hard for teacher types, you know, but it's healthier.
Yeah. But once you start doing it and making it a habit of just, being more relaxed about everything or not letting things work you up, like when you realize the effect of it and how like you can't control everything. Like you can't like turn a bad day. You can't like negate a legitimately bad day completely, but you can to some degree reduce how bad it is or make okay days, you know, better and that kind of thing. Just from relaxing and not letting things get to you. You know,
definitely. Well, this has been really good and really insightful. And I think there's going to be a lot more people looking up instructional design now for sure. That's really cool.
Yeah. I think it's not for everybody because some people don't recognize fully that instructional design means you don't have students. Because I've heard people that hire instructional designers make a point of emphasizing to people they're interviewing, you're not going to have students, because there are some teachers maybe that don't want to be in full classroom situations anymore, but may not necessarily, they still want to have students in some capacity. So, you know, there's probably some spaces of education in which you still have students. You may not be a classroom teacher. So it's just something to keep in mind that instructional design is very behind the scenes. It's a pretty much like an office job. You know, you have colleagues, but you don't have students.
That actually helped me because for some reason I was imagining you presenting the course that you designed. So that's a helpful distinction.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, see, the thing is, no, that's the thing is instructional design is you're creating the learning and someone else delivers it or it's online. Now, that being said, when I was at the university, I did do professional development. Like there were times when I was asked, this was among many things I did, I was asked to create some learning and deliver it virtually. You know, we've been in those before where someone's like basically delivering learning live in a Zoom session. I did a few of those and that I would have continued to do that if I had stayed at the university. So, you know, every instructional design position is different. So, but even then I still didn't have students. I just had faculty that I was presenting the learning to. No, I'll always, like, in my opinion, I still refer to myself as a teacher and I definitely support teachers.
Definitely. Yes, once a teacher, always a teacher.
Oh, yeah. I think I've been doing it long enough, even though like it's not my title anymore. It's part of my recent work history for long enough that I still identify as one.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Jane. This has been so good. And if you have any questions for Jane, you can type them in the comment box. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer them. And if you're interested in interviewing with me, you can email me at teachertherapytrish@gmail.com. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye for now, everybody.
Bye.